It was another deadly weekend in the U.S. with dozens killed or injured in shootings in major cities across the country. Of course, instead of addressing the spate of murders, Democrats largely turned their attention to a crime that didn't even really happen the way they thought it did. We'll explain what we're talking about in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. I remember seeing the story as it broke. Terror attack against a pride parade in Fort Lauderdale. Horrible. You read this headline, you think this is atrocious. How could such a terrible thing happen in America today? But then when you actually got into the details, despite the fact that there was so much reporting on this as a hate crime, an act of terror. In fact, here's the mayor of Fort Lauderdale himself calling it such.
This was a terrorist attack against the LGBT community. This is exactly what it is.
You don't think this was an accident?
Hardly an accident. It was deliberate, it was premeditated, and it was targeted against a specific person. Luckily, they missed that person, but unfortunately, they hit two other people, which I think they'll be okay. I don't know. They're laying on the ground right now. We're hoping that they'll survive.
Completely wrong on the motivation and what actually happened in terms of intent here. Two people were hit, one tragically was killed, one was pretty seriously injured, but it was an accident, despite what the mayor here is saying. A Democrat mayor, of course, who is playing into a broader narrative of an America that is constantly on edge and under siege from bigoted, white supremacist Trump supporters everywhere. That's what you have to be worried about. Even at a pride parade in Fort Lauderdale, that's where the mind of the media immediately goes. In fact, in this case, they transitioned to DESANTIS. Hashtag DESANTIS was trending as this went on. You might say, what does the governor, Ron DeSantis of Florida, have to do with an accident? The man here who drove the car, the pickup truck, was a member of the gay men's chorus and somebody who was trying to celebrate along with everybody else in this pride parade. He had a problem. His foot essentially got stuck on the accelerator instead of the brake, and he drove into some people, and tragically one of them died. That's what happened. A pure accident. Very sad, a tragedy, but an accident. No terrorist intent whatsoever. But on Twitter, DeSantis was trending for hours. Now, why would that be? Well, it's because Ron DeSantis signed legislation recently that says that if someone if someone moves their car while there are protesters blocking active traffic, there will be at least some defense made for a person who's just trying to get away instead of allowing, and we know this is what happens with BLM and ANTIFA, left-wing protesters to seize roadways and effectively temporarily kidnap people in their vehicles because they have something to complain about for the day. So it's all of a sudden Ron DeSantis who is at fault here, and we are being told that Ron DeSantis is responsible for this act of terror. That was not an act of terror, and that was actually an accident, pure and simple. Sad, tragic, yes. Terrorist, not at all. So then why would the mayor say this? Why would they go out and talk about this? Well, as you know, you're supposed to believe that the biggest problem when it comes to law and order and the safety and security of our streets are the insurrectionists, the so-called Trump supporters from January 6th. They're the bad guys and gals. They're the people that at any moment in time they could break out and do another attempt at a coup to topple the government. All this hyperbole and exaggeration and breathless nonsense you hear about what was a one-time, one-day riot where not a single person in law enforcement was killed as a result of protester actions. The only person killed that day from violence was, in fact, a protester, Ashley Babbitt, as we know. But this is the narrative, as we always say, as we talk about. This is what the focus is on, trying to get people to think about that, not to think about what's going on in cities all across America. For example, the Chicago Sun-Times, this is just over the weekend, 52 shot, 5 fatally, okay? In Philadelphia, 3 dead, more than a dozen injured in a weekend of bloodshed. The Baltimore Sun, 5 people shot, 2 fatally over the weekend in Baltimore as relentless week of violence continues. I mean, this is just a series of headlines. But 52 people shot in Chicago in one weekend. That's a lot, folks, right? We start to crunch the numbers on this and see, oh, that's right, all the data we've been telling you about, that this is the worst murder and shooting rate the country has seen in 20 years. It's all true. And there are viral videos that are showing exactly what that means in very real, very visceral terms. We're blurring some of this out here. This was terrible. This went viral over the weekend in Chicago. A man and woman, you see, they are pulled. There are people driving around here. There's a big crowd pulled out of the car, and both of them were shot. They're dragged out of their car. They're shot at close range. The man was executed. He was killed right there on the scene. The woman, I believe, is still alive as I speak to you, but severely, gravely wounded by being shot at close range. What do you think the Democrats, when they do talk about this, which is not very often, what do you think their focus is on? Oh, it's the guns. It's the guns, of course. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki reading from that sheet of music once again.
The president feels a great deal of the crime we're seeing as a result of gun violence. You can expect he'll speak to that and his commitment to continuing to address gun violence and gun safety in the country. And certainly a long time has passed since the crime bill in '94. He's spoken himself to differences, things he would stand by, things he might do differently. But I wouldn't see this as a response to that as much as a conveying to the American people what he's going to do now to help address the rising crime we've seen over the last year and a half.
Notice they always talk about the gun violence and not just the violence issue, because they want to make it about how, well, we would fix this if only they would pass some kind of legislation to further restrict guns in this country. No one who understands the history of gun legislation, including the assault rifle ban that Joe Biden now is a proponent of, the assault rifle ban that went into effect in the 90s, did not have any appreciable effect whatsoever on crime. And in fact, while there was a tremendous decline in gun violence across the country over about 2 decades, you had a huge increase in so-called, I know they're so-called assault rifles, you don't have to send me the emails on that one, of civilian ownership in civilian hands. So why is it the focus on guns? Because here's what they won't do, here's what they can't do. Go back and tell everybody, you know what, when we started saying that law enforcement was systemically racist in this country and that was the primary problem, we were wrong. We undermined safety and security in communities all across America, particularly in major cities, and we have suffered terribly as a result of it. We are going to now back our cops. You can even say in just bipartisan fashion, we'll back law enforcement, back the blue, and decide that these defund the police storylines that the media was pushing for months, in fact, defund the police actions that were taken by some city councils and others, other political bodies, that was a terrible idea. It was a shockingly stupid slogan, defund the police, and a really bad general premise, especially at a time when the country's already on edge as a result of lockdowns and the pandemic and everything else that we've been put through, all the stress the country's been under. Democrats will never admit they were wrong on this one, though, because that would have to mean that the other side, those who backed the blue, were right. All right, after the break, more on the weekend of violence, the Democratic response with retired NYP detective Harry Houck. Stay right there. If you've ever thought about investing in real estate, I want you to take me up on this recommendation right now. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, where you can learn more about my friends at Done For You Real Estate. If you haven't checked them out yet, let me make this easy for you. These guys have found a way to make real estate investing straightforward, and their system flat out works. I know because I'm using it successfully. It allows everyday hardworking Americans like you and me to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. I can't possibly tell you in strong enough terms during the 60-second commercial how important it is that you check these guys out. So how about this? If you visit doneforyoubuck.com, at the top of the page is a podcast interview I did with Done For You Real Estate, where you can hear my personal experience with their company in my own words. I'll tell you about it in detail, from picking the city to the broker, the loan, even getting a tenant in place, so now I get free cash flow every month. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, listen to the podcast interview, and give my friends a chance to show you what they can do for you. That's doneforyoubuck.com. As violence rages across the country, big city Democrats continue to go soft on criminals. Case in point, New York City. According to a recent investigation, the majority of alleged looters and rioters in New York City during last year's George Floyd riots were never charged with a crime. The New York Post reports, quote, Hundreds of alleged looters and rioters busted last year in protests over George Floyd's murder by police have had their charges dropped, according to NYPD data. In the Bronx, which saw fires in the street and mass looting in June 2020, more than 60% of arrestees have had charges dropped, according to the investigation by NBC New York. The news is a slap in the face to the many business owners who had their livelihoods shattered during the 2020 riots. So what kind of message is this sending to criminals not just here in New York, but around the country? Harry Houck is a retired NYPD detective. He joins us now to give his perspective. Harry, as always, good to see you.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
So what comes to mind for you when you see that we have now hundreds and hundreds of cases of essentially riot-involved behavior just dismissed by, it's happening in New York, but it's happening in other places around the country too?
Sure. I mean, the bottom line is that you have no real prosecutions. You have no responsibility for your actions, which basically means there's no law and order in those cities. You got the cops out there trying to make arrests. You have a record amount of gun arrests made by the NYPD, and the prosecutions are lousy. You got Vance, who's a district attorney, Democrat district attorney in Manhattan, who is too busy trying to investigate, or let's just say go fishing for something that Trump might have done wrong in his taxes. So they're sitting here telling you that they don't have the time to prosecute these cases, or they're too backed up. I don't think so. That's a big problem.
And what does it mean for morale for the guys and gals in uniform on the street when they see that people, I mean, a lot of these rioters, Harry, a lot of these individuals who have now had their cases just dismissed, right? They'll suffer no criminal penalties whatsoever. It's like it never happened. But not only do they destroy property, a lot of them have been involved in assaults and altercations with law enforcement. But because they're in a crowd, they don't necessarily get tagged with that charge, right? Because if there are enough people throwing rocks and bottles at cops, it seems, somehow nobody really gets held responsible. So what does that mean for the rank and file?
They're locking up a guy who's throwing rocks or is inside of a building. I mean, they've got probable cause for an arrest, and this person could be prosecuted. For some reason, the district attorney's office doesn't want to prosecute these people because I think the bottom line is with the Democrats is that they don't want to see minorities in jail. That's the bottom line to me. And that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm looking at. And it's not only minorities doing the rioting. You got a lot of young white kids out there, members of ANTIFA, Black Lives Matter. They're doing a lot of the rioting too, and they don't want to prosecute them also. So, the only solution here, in any of these cities are three basic things. Okay, it's enforce the law, make arrests, and fully prosecute criminals. You don't do that, you've got nothing but anarchy.
Have you ever seen anything like this before, where there seems to be a trend? I mean, I know you spent decades in law enforcement. Was there a period you can remember when it seemed like one of the major political parties in the country just decided, in this case the Democrats, of course, just decided that laws don't really matter as much, that the criminals have been getting too raw of a deal in recent years or recent decades? And so it almost feels, I mean, pro-criminal is too maybe flippant a way of putting it, but that's what it looks like to a lot of folks when you see the district attorney in New York, in Philadelphia, in San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and Chicago, I mean, making these kinds of decisions where they're clearly giving people more than just a second chance. They're giving them a full-on pass, saying, we're not going to bring charges because you were involved in BLM riots. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Well, before 1982, when I first became a police officer in New York, New York City was basically an S-hole. I mean, there was crime all over the place, but I didn't see lack of prosecutions. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office under Morgenthau, when I first became a police officer, was pretty great. We were really good in prosecute these criminals. Now you got the Democrats. These Democrats are this moron de Blasio who got voted in twice. You vote a guy like him in, and he's so anti-cop, and you have a police commissioner who comes in, and he's got to walk this fine line on what to do, because he doesn't want to get fired, and he also wants the support of his police officers. So it's really hard. But these district attorneys' offices, I mean, the people of New York elected this guy Vance. I mean, is this what they want? Is this what they voted for? And I say to myself many times, what are the people in New York thinking? I mean, they brought this guy de Blasio in twice. The man is a moron, okay? And now, you just got to hope that the Democrats will have a decent candidate to run for mayor. The Republicans have nobody, because they're basically feckless in the state of New York, and so they don't even have a candidate. So I don't know what's going to happen.
And you often will hear that what they want here, what the anti-cop left and the Democrat progressives are demanding, is increased police training and greater usage of things, and this has now become a bit of a laugh line among those who see law enforcement for what it is, a greater usage of social workers. But let's just focus in on the training component for a second. What is supposed to happen to prevent law enforcement from ever being involved in a lethal force incident with anyone, but particularly with a young African-American male, because that's the focus of Black Lives Matter? What kind of training is going to accomplish that? I mean, they keep saying we need more money for training. What exactly do they think the cops are going to learn that not only do they not already know, but that will work 100% of the time?
Well, first of all, how do you get more training? How can you demand more training from the police when you want to defund it? There's $1 billion was taken away from the New York City Police Department, for crying out loud, right? And the police officers do need more training. Listen, we were all for training. I mean, we used to get quarterly training when I was on the job, and we got training at the rifle range. Shooting at the
yeah. But Harry, they get a lot of training, right? So what's the training they're missing that's going to make BLM activists happy?
Well, there's no way they can come up with every possible scenario that a police officer can't shoot somebody out there. I mean, there's no way it can happen. Every day is a new day. Every incident is a new incident there. There's no way you can be trained any better than they are now. I mean, okay, put some more money into training, that's fine. All the police officers are behind that. But Black Lives Matter, first of all, is never going to be happy with nothing. They don't want black people arrested. They don't want minorities arrested. That is the issue. And I've gotten a lot of slack over saying that, all right? But that's what somehow the Democrats believe that they get reelected by keeping these cities, full of crime, and somehow they're happy of the murdering of children and the thugs taking over these cities, and they get reelected. What is the problem with the Democrat voter? I mean, you saw it even happen, when before Giuliani came in, all the Democrats in New York had it with the crime, and they all voted for Giuliani, and then things changed. All right, now
I'm wondering when that recognition is gonna happen now, Harry, because it feels like we're seeing all the data, we're seeing all the trends, the viral videos of the crimes that are happening day in and day out. Every weekend now it seems more stuff out of Chicago and cities all across the country. Harry, appreciate your perspective, man. I hope these things get better.
Okay, buddy, it's good talking to you. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will. All right, attendees at the Western Conservative Summit in Denver were met with protests and harassment by members of Antifa over the weekend. After the break, the First TV's Tiana Lowe joins us to give her firsthand account. She was there of what happened on the ground when Antifa was running wild. Stay tuned. We're living in very uncertain times, and being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. I'm sure you've noticed the world we live in today is anything but predictable. The government is passing massive spending bills. The Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars in fiat currency, and many experts are predicting inflation could run rampant in the coming months. That could spell disaster for the dollars in your bank account. We can all benefit from something a little more reliable right about now. What could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about real gold and silver that you can hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group right now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now, 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. Give them a call right now, 833-600-GOLD. One more time, that's 833-600-GOLD. Check them out today. Over the weekend, the Western Conservative Summit took place in Denver. That's the annual gathering of conservatives featuring guests like Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert and investigative journalist Andy Lowe. And of course, the two-day event attracted none other than the lovely folks of Antifa. Watch how attendees of the summit were treated outside the venue.
Not here. Back your back inside, loser! Back inside, loser! Back inside, losers! Back inside!
The first contributor, Tiana Lowe, was on the ground reporting from there. She joins us now to tell us what the heck was going on. Tina, I'm glad to see you're in one piece. How you doing?
Hi, Buck. I am doing surprisingly okay.
So you shot footage of Antifa members threatening Andy Lowe's life while he was looking down from the building. What were they saying?
So the main thing to understand about this summit is that it was very much smaller in scale than it usually is, only 500 people maximum. And they were there for Andy Lowe. Even though, Rick Santorum, members of Congress were there, Andy Lowe is the one that they loathe. Andy was already assaulted a couple of weeks ago. As you can see in the clip there, he has a leg brace. It got so dangerous that the police had to cordon off the final exit of the hotel in order to get him safely out of there. Because in their mind, Andy is a Nazi scum pig. I don't understand how the gay son of Vietnamese immigrants is exactly a Nazi, but that's what they view him. They view him as a class traitor. They view him as antithetical to their idea of communist solidarity.
How many Antifa folks, and we're seeing what looks like a few dozen here, was that the full scope of what you were dealing with, or were there others?
There were some others. I mean, mind you, Denver is not a hotbed of Antifa. So you were looking at the JV squad of Antifa, so to speak. This is orders of magnitude worse when you go into a city like Portland or a city like Seattle. And still, homicides are up in Denver. They're the highest since the 80s. The crime problem in Denver is mirroring the crime problem everywhere. And so this was just the tip of the iceberg, Buck. They hate Andy Lowe. They were able to successfully close down a street without any of the cops arresting them because the cops' number one priority at the time was making sure the people inside the building were safe. So even the first night of the summit on Friday, members of Antifa were flashing lights into the building, which are designed to break the camera on your phone and designed to burn your retinas if you're trying to film them. And the cops couldn't do anything about it because they were focused so much on just protecting the people inside the building. So it's not even that the cops didn't want to do anything, it's that they don't have enough force.
You were also harassed personally by Antifa for trying to film them as a person in the media doing journalism. Let's watch a clip of that.
You're dumb. You're really dumb. You're going to get hit by a train.
I think I'll see the train.
You're going to be hit by a train.
Please take 3 steps back into traffic for me.
Yeah. Where would you like to stand? In front of the train or in front of the cars? You should probably go away.
Isn't the whole purpose of a protest?
Shut up. You don't get shit. We don't know you shit. Get lost.
Antifa
Get lost.
and anarchists and people like this, communists, they prefer not to be filmed. It is their constitutional right to ask not to be
You're
filmed.
literally going to get hit by
We
a
would
train
just ask
or
that
a
you
car.
honor that because we don't want to repeat
Go away.
yesterday.
There's so much here that's amazing. First of all, it is not their constitutional right to not be filmed in public, but I honestly don't believe there's a single person in this Antifa group who has ever read the Constitution, so I would start with that. But then also, I like the guy with the anarchist fanny pack just because, he's ready. He's probably got some gauze and some stuff to put in his eyes if he gets hit with the tear gas or something, I guess. But why were you just showing up there trying to? They don't know who you are, right? You're not Andy Lowe. So were they just upset that anybody was showing what they were doing in a public place?
Yes, precisely. There was a shocking moment when there was a protester who was not a member of Antifa. He was just an anti-cop protester where he was trying to film it. He's on their side, and they kicked him out of their protest. You know, this might be the first group of demonstrators, liberal or conservative, who specifically do not want to be filmed. You know, the Women's March want to be filmed. Antifa, they view the media. Doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative, they view the media as their enemy, which is why you see all these corporate media reporters. They spend all day reporting on QAnon from behind a keyboard because they know the second they go out and try and cover this stuff, they're going to be the ones who are harassed. They're going to be the ones who have lasers shined in their faces. And so they just are opposed to being identified because they know that criminal activity goes on at night. You know, I believe that it is a form of assault to flash lasers in people's eyes. And as you can see with some of those earlier clips, there was violence that unrolled out, and you are not allowed to block a street. But they know that they're holding a city hostage. They know the second the cops actually try to arrest one of them, they could turn it into something about BLM. And so they just don't want to be identified. Somebody they can keep on doing this again and again and again, and the DAs are too scared to prosecute anyone. And as a result, the rest of the citizens are being held hostage.
What do they believe, by the way? If they're going to show up and do this little anti-Andy no protest, we already talked about some of the idiocy on display from them in that regard. But these folks, they have placards and they've gathered together and they're in a public place trying to make some kind of a political point. Were you able to gather? You know, were they like handing out Bernie Sanders pamphlets or something? Or like, well, what's the point? Why are they there?
So functionally, some of the flyers that I was able to obtain, it's just about how capitalism is the root of all evil. It's the root of racism. It's the root of lack of class solidarity, yada, yada, yada. But that was the initial reason why I went out there. I was not geared up for riot squads. You know, I did not bring anti-laser glasses. I did not bring black boots. I went out in the same outfit that I was covering this regular conference in. You know, just thinking innocently, I would just ask, what specifically did they want? And they basically, you know, first they say, oh, we want Hyatt to put out a statement condemning what's going on inside. But the truth, they want to scare people. They want to scare the Andy No's of the world from coming to downtown Denver. They want to silence us, and they will use violence and intimidation to do it.
Tiana, glad you're safe. Thanks for bringing this to us. I mean, amazing that Antifa even exists in this country, and yet they pop up in city after city doing the same crazy nonsense. Glad you're safe. Glad your eyes didn't get lasered too much. Appreciate you joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Buck.
All right, coming up, New York Post columnist David Marcus joins me to discuss his new book on the handling of the coronavirus pandemic and if he thinks the new Delta variant of the virus will further threaten our constitutional freedoms ahead. That's next. As the coronavirus pandemic is winding down, we can now look back at the last year and a half to see how it all unfolded. New York Post columnist David Marcus does just that in his latest book, Charade, the COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. He lays out how the media, politicians, and elected officials engaged in myths, half-truths, and flat-out lies to bring about obedience throughout the nation. He joins us now to discuss. David, great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So the pandemic led to a widespread suspension of our constitutional freedoms. Why is that, man? I mean, and how did we let this happen?
You know, that's a big question that I think the main answer to which is, you know, read the book. But, you know, if I can thumbnail it, like I think very early on, everybody was in agreement, you know, a couple weeks, make sure the hospitals don't get overrun. This all seems perfectly rational, perfectly normal. Close school down for a week or two. I think it all made sense. It turned out to be a bell that was very difficult to unring. State legislatures handed enormous power over to governors, and a lot of governors then just handed enormous power over to a sort of conglomerate of experts. And it wasn't all the experts. There were a lot of experts who disagreed with the lockdowns, who disagreed with what they were doing, and their voices were simply silenced. And so between the government apathy and the media's thirst for lockdowns, this lasted a year. It's insane.
I have to keep reminding people, especially as somebody who was on a flight over the weekend and has done a fair amount of flying in recent months, that this isn't over. I feel like that's something that everyone needs to understand. Just because there are a lot of folks now across the country who can walk around without masks on, and there's a lot of places where there are high levels of vaccination, and whether one is vaccinated or not, because of the high vaccination rate, there's just a general lessening of the anxiety. But I mean, the transportation secretary with Pete Buttigieg still mandating masks. You can't walk around an airport, vaccinated, not vaccinated, doesn't matter. You can't walk around an airport without a mask on. You can't fly anywhere without a mask on, or be on federal property. This is idiocy. I mean, at some point, people just need to call this out for what it is. And I think it's important that everyone is reminded of the fact, I don't know you dive into a lot of this in your book, but they keep saying that it's based on the data. Well, the data now says that the stuff that they're doing is crazy. So what the heck are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the data was always cherry-picked to be as negative as possible. I think that the best example that we saw of that was very early on with the infection fatality rate. Trump went on TV and I think ill-advisedly used the word hunch in early March to say that he had spoken to people who thought it was way lower than the 2 or 3% that the WHO was talking about. And it turned out Trump was right. But in the weeks later, when we found out just how low the infection fatality rate was, that stopped being a part of the news coverage because no good news was allowed, because any kind of good news might lead people to try to get back to their lives. And this happened again and again.
It's remarkable to see also that there are still people who are walking around taking these precautions. Everywhere you go, there's also a lot of this mask theater stuff, right? There's the unnecessary, wash your hands and social distance signs are still in a lot of places that could take them down. But you can tell that all along, at the final stage in particular, but all along, there's been this fear of making people who have embraced extreme anxiety of this feel funny about things. I mean, that's one thing that I've noticed. There's a concern whether you're in a private apartment complex or you're at a store. It's always, we don't want to offend the mask maniac, so let's move this thing as slow as possible. Even when the CDC, for example, has said, no, it's really okay now.
Yeah, I mean, I really do lay a lot of this right at the feet of Joe Biden, who I think throughout the campaign and then even into his presidency was exhibiting paranoid, cultish, bizarre behavior with regard to the mask. We all remember him quite recently on the Zoom call with foreign leaders wearing a mask. It made absolutely no sense. It was nonsense. And it did help or encourage a lot of Americans to get to a very unhealthy place in which their attitude seems to be like, oh, as long as it's not inconveniencing me to death, we may as well keep doing this stuff, even if there's no point to it. And it's bad. I mean, it is obedience. It's a kind of obedience I don't think I ever expected to see from Americans.
It's been really disappointing, I have to say, David, to see how many people went along with this, and even some supposed conservatives or people who believe themselves to be politically or ideologically on the right defending the practice of shutting down churches while big box stores were open and while grocery stores. I mean, I haven't forgotten any of this. And I feel like there's this push-pull, that there's a tension right now between I want everyone to move beyond this entirely, in a sense, right? I want people to go about their lives, to live life again, to stop being so worried. But especially with some of this stuff still very much lingering in the background, I mean, some of these policies still stick around. I think we need to have the fight, to really have the fight now, where it's not just all overtaken by anxiety. I know this is a part of what you're doing in the book, to look at, okay, well, what was true and what wasn't? How effective were mask mandates, really? How much did these things that we were made to do on pain of being, well, first of all, suffering legally, but also being told you're a terrible person who doesn't care about old people dying, were they right?
No, I mean, they were wrong at almost every turn. And it is desperately important that the actual history that, be known about that and just how many of these things turned out to be abysmal mistakes, whether it was, aggrandizing everything Andrew Cuomo did that turned out to be disasters, or whether it was running down everything that Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott did, which turned out to be good. I'm deeply worried that history is going to reflect the lies and not the truth. It's part of why I wrote the book. And, I hope that people will read it, and I hope that it can be a resource so that when this happens again, we don't fall for these lies again.
On this point about when it happens again, I would just note for everybody, because I get this now, because people have moved, especially those who were not addicted to the panic and the mask mandate in the beginning. They want to move on in their lives. They want to go to this next phase. But I also have to point out to them that, just over the weekend, we were seeing all these reports about the Delta variant spreading in Europe and how we should worry that, this is going to be the primary variant that hits us in the U.S. We're going to have a debate about booster shots for the vaccine. Mm-hmm. They still haven't figured out if natural immunity is lifelong or lasts for years, or, is it better than the vaccines? People always tell you, oh no, the vaccines are better. They don't know. They actually do not know that. But they just want to say it because this is the storyline that we're told by the people in charge, by the apparatus. And I think, David, that, we should be able to point out now, the same people who are saying be super worried about the Delta variant have been telling you just 2 weeks, just 2 months, whatever it may be, and also that variants are coming for you for like a year now.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And they're also the same people like Andrew Cuomo who said, I might not let the vaccine into my state. Right? They're the same people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris who said, I'm not taking the vaccine unless Dr. Fauci says it's okay. Why? Right? Why? What is it about Dr. Fauci? Like, you don't trust the FDA? You don't trust other scientists? I mean, none of this had anything to do with science. If not from the very beginning, then at least from like a couple weeks into it. And the American people got played in a lot of ways.
All right. Good to see you. Good luck with the book. Got to keep holding the line on this one, my friend.
That's right, man. Thanks for having me.
Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse in hot water after being confronted about his membership in an all-white beach club. That story and more coming up in tonight's Quick Hits. Stay with us. I've been telling you for a while now about online thieves who can easily steal your home's title. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take it from this thief who stole over 150 homes and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is why you need Home Title Lock.
Nobody thinks that I can take their house and borrow against the house. Oh, no, I have title insurance for that. No, it's in my name, or he would have to get some special document. They would call me. Nobody's calling you. After I've stolen the title, borrowed against it, or sold the property, or done whatever I've done with it, it's 60 to 90 days to even figure out that they're the victim of this crime. By that point, you start getting foreclosure notices, and you realize you've got 4 mortgages on your house. Not only that, you don't even own your home anymore. It's not even in your name.
Heard enough? Don't let this crime happen to you. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim and enter radio for 30 free days of protection. That's code radio at HometitleLock.com. Again, code radio at HometitleLock.com. A top Democratic senator defends his membership in an all-white beach club, and a transgender weightlifter is officially going to the Tokyo Olympics. Those stories in Quick Hits. Let's get to them. In fact, I want to start with the weightlifter, who is Hubbard is this individual's name. I've got to tell you, it's remarkable. But here you go. New Zealand names transgender athlete Hubbard to Women's Tokyo Olympics weightlifting team. Now, this individual had previously competed as a male powerlifter, or I think it's called powerlifting, whatever, weightlifting at the Olympic level. And this, it's worth pointing out, this is not a sport, yeah, sure, a lot of people, they could, if they were to be transgender, there's an advantage in strength and speed that somebody may have, but in some sports, volleyball or basketball, there's also a really notable skill component that might mean that the advantage, the gender change advantage might not quite as strong. This is weightlifting. This is size and strength. I know there's technique to it, but let's be real about this. This is size and strength is 90% of what this is all about. And now Hubbard is going to be competing against women in the sport of Olympic weightlifting. if I were a female athlete going to this Olympics who had spent years just battling it out with others to get to this point, to be competitive, all that time in the gym training, all that time. If I were one of those individuals, I know I would be angry. And a lot of them are, by the way, before anyone starts saying, oh, well, you're not. Yeah, but a lot of them are angry about it, and they should be. But you see, the left's gender politics are such that even what everyone can plainly see, you have to ignore. You're not allowed to really notice. You're not allowed to observe. That's a big part of all of this. So I would just note that this is going to play out now, and Hubbard may end up winning. It'd be interesting if this individual does not win. But now you have transgender weightlifters competing against other women in the Olympics, no less. This is what the left. This is the world the left insists we all live in. But then there's the ways that Democrats think that they get to live by a separate set of rules, which is true with Democrat politicians all the time. Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse belongs to a club called Bailey's Beach. And as I understand it, Bailey's Beach has a waiting list for which you can spend your entire life on, meaning that it's very difficult to get into this place. And it's also a place where if you are a non-white ethnic minority, you may find that you aren't able to get in because I don't believe there are any or very, very, very few members who are non-white at this point in time. Democrat Senator Whitehouse was asked about this, and here is how he answered.
Back in 2017, you had expressed concerns about the membership of the all-white Bailey's Beach Club, said that you hoped it would become more diverse. Now, your family's been members, your wife is one of the largest shareholders. Has there been any traction in that? Are there any minority members of the club now?
I think the people who are running the place are still working on that, and I'm sorry it hasn't happened yet.
Do you have concerns in 2021? I mean, obviously it's been 4 years. You had remarks on the floor following the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd saying, hoping to root out systemic racism in the country. Your thoughts on an elite, all-white, wealthy club, again, in this day and age? Should these clubs continue to exist?
It's a long tradition in Rhode Island, and there are many of them. I think we just need to work our way through the issues. Thank you.
They're working on it. I love that answer, too. And isn't that great to be a Democrat? You get to virtue signal about how much you care as an elected official about Black Lives Matter and about Breonna Taylor. And then you get to go spend time at your all-white, incredibly elitist beach club. And when someone asks you why there are no minority members because you're a Democrat, you get to say, yeah, we're working on that. Sure they are. Straw poll, interesting data out of a straw poll. Just want to show this to you. Not scientific stuff here, but Ron DeSantis. This is the presidential election. Vote for all candidates you approve of in President 2024. 74% of folks, and this was the Western Conservative Summit straw poll, 74% of folks said they would support Ron DeSantis. 71% Trump. 42% Ted Cruz. Mike Pompeo, 39%. Tim Scott, 35%. Ron DeSantis, folks. We actually put out a Twitter poll today and online, and we had tens of thousands of people vote. And when you actually break it down by if you could only vote for one, who would it be? Ron DeSantis is also at about 74%. So there's a lot of Team DeSantis love out there right now. I know it's early, but we're already thinking about who's going to be holding that banner of conservatism the next time around. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.